Eerst en vooral, welkom iedereen in dit intieme Zoom-moment, georganiseerd door mezelf, dat wil zeggen de School for Focus, en in samenwerking met Oliver Burkeman. Digitale meetings die hebben zowat de neiging om steriel te zijn, maar niet zo vandaag. En wel omwille van de volgende redenen. Eerst en vooral, Oliver die is dan wel een bestselling auteur, die kan leven van zijn pen, maar hij is absoluut niet iemand die naast zijn schoenen loopt. Wel integendeel. Tijdens dit interview zal u hem leren kennen als een nederig iemand die heel graag zijn kennis met u deelt. Het eerste half uur van deze Zoom-meeting leg ik Oliver het vuur aan de schenen, maar daarna geef ik u graag het woord. Met andere woorden, denk nu al na over de volgende vraag. Welke vragen hebt u voor Oliver? En aarzel niet om hem de pieren uit de neus te halen, want hij is er helemaal voor u, onze Oliver. En dus om te garanderen dat alles technisch goed loopt, heb ik u ook zo net gevraagd om uw camera af te zetten. Ik geef zo dadelijk het woord aan Oliver, maar toch nog eerst even dit. Waarom in hemelsnaam heb ik op deze avond dit interview opgezet met Oliver? En dan ga ik even naar een aantal slides die ik voorbereid heb. Het zijn er maar een paar. Omdat ik vind dat watgene Oliver zegt, dat perfect past bij de missie en de visie die ik graag wil uitdragen via de School for Focus. De School for Focus die wil ervoor zorgen dat mensen meer grip krijgen. Dat ze meer grip krijgen op tijd en energie en aandacht. Zodanig dat zij hun werkdagen kunnen beëindigen met een gevoel van tevredenheid. Zodanig dat zij 's avonds nog genoeg energie over hebben om andere rollen te spelen. Die van echtgenoot of echtgenote, die van moeder of vader, of van dochter of zoon, van ouders die misschien wat meer hulp nodig hebben. Het is mijn overtuiging dat focus een bijzonder mooi topic is. Het is een topic, u ziet het daar, waarin welzijn en productiviteit met elkaar samenkomen. En wat doet de School for Focus dan voor u? Wel, ik doe heel veel verschillende dingen. Ik heb een traject voor teams. Er is ook individuele begeleiding. Er zijn masterclasses, zoals bijvoorbeeld die van 2 april, waarbij ik inga op de link tussen thuiswerk en focus. En nummer 4, dat is vandaag, Mastering the Art of Focus, waarbij ik interviews afleg met executives en bestselling authors. En dan komen we natuurlijk bij Oliver terecht. En dan is het nu tijd om over te gaan naar het Engels. So Oliver, now I will switch into English.
Great.
So, yeah, okay, good. Did you understand some words? Do you have a clue of what I was talking
some
about?
words, but
Ah,
not usually several words in a row, so it's not very useful.
yeah,
Yes, I can
okay.
understand.
So first of all, let me start with the story of how my love for Oliver, or rather my love for Oliver's work, began. In February 2023, my son Karel took me on a surf holiday to Portugal. Well, this is to say he surfed and I paid for the trip. At that time, I have to confess, I was not doing so well. I was like stuck in my professional career and I was unsure of which way to go. So my son Karel, in fact, he kidnapped me to Portugal. Karel and we arrived in Lisbon, and from there we traveled north to Ericeira. That's a small village with ideal surf conditions. And my son Karel and I, we were just walking through the streets of Ericeira, and at a certain moment we passed a tiny bookstore. And the display window only had titles, of course, in Portuguese, but there was like one title in English. And on the cover, I saw this book. I saw this book. I'm going to show it to you. It's 4,000 Weeks. And so I swear it to you, the cover, the book was like calling out to me. It was as if it was shouting, Isabel, you really have to buy me. And when I finished the book, a part of the fog around my professional path had already started to clear. So Oliver, thank you very much for that. And of course, when I heard through your newsletter that you had a sequel to 4,000 Weeks, and so this sequel is this book, it is called Meditations for Mortals, I just knew I had to read this book as well. So, Oliver, my first question for you. I think that two of the key ideas in your work are the following. First of all, we cannot be in control of everything. Checking off all our tasks is simply impossible. And idea number two, in consequence, most time management advice is actually a lie because it makes people believe that total control is possible, is achievable. So my questions for you, Oliver, did I understand your message correctly? And do you also remember the exact moment that you came to these insights? Up to you.
Hmm. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. It's a real pleasure. Yeah, I think you summarized things very well. Maybe I don't think that most time management advice is a lie, but certainly plenty of it. Um,
Mm,
I think that a lot of what is going on when we um, sort of think about how we want to use our time and how we want to change our lives, and then also a lot of the messages that we get when we go looking for advice on how to do that, a lot of it ends up serving this purpose of um, sort of maintaining a fantasy, yeah, maintaining a certain kind of unhelpful illusion that we are eventually going to get to the point where we're sort of finally on top of everything, finally in control of everything. So sometimes that advice serves a little bit as a, well, I guess the idiom in English would be as it's sort of enabling, like when you like when you help an addict to maintain their addiction through what you do. Because I think that we're struggling a lot of the time to kind of get to this position where, okay, now I can relax because I have everything in working order. I'm responding to the things that come in to my life at the same speed that they come in, so I don't get overwhelmed. Of course, this situation is never actually in existence. It's always coming soon with the next um, time management system, or the next life philosophy, or the next course, or the next you know, extra bit of self-discipline that you're going to find from somewhere to cause yourself to do it. So we're always being sort of led forwards without ever getting there. And I think the reason that we never get to that fantasy place of being in command of everything is, as you say, also that that's just not the right way to think about human flourishing. It's not the right way to think about things that humans get to do. Humans living in a world of infinite inputs like the one we live in today are playing a losing game if we try to get to the point where we are completely on top of it all. And then I guess maybe it's a point number three that I want to sort of emphasize as well.
mhm,
This is not a intrinsically depressing uh, state of affairs, because I very firmly believe that once you can accept even just a bit, once you can accept even just a bit that this is the situation, that limitations define us, that getting on top of everything is impossible, it's actually incredibly liberating and motivating, because then you kind of have permission to focus on a few things that count, to let some other things fall by the wayside, as you sometimes have to do, and just to sort of um, shift from this situation where we are kind of subconsciously trying to escape what it is to be human, and instead you get to really much more fully enter into what it means to be human. So I do think that this is good news, even though it starts by saying lots of depressing things.
so it's about we have our limitations because we are just finite
Mhm.
with finite time and finite talents also and finite control um, on what is happening around us. that is idea number one, but you just added another idea. This thought is liberating, is liberating us, because then you can just focus on the few things that really matter to us. So I think that is really a beautiful idea. One of the words, because I like words and I like language, is that one of the words that often appears in your work, in your books and in your newsletter, is a word it is difficult for me to pronounce in English, so you will have to correct me. It's the imperfectionism. I even don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah.
But isn't there like a risk that people might see it as a letting go of all ambition as a form of laziness?
I mean, I suppose there's a risk. I think that I sort of have two responses to this, and um, one of them is more sort of a real response. But the first one that I just want to say is that th this may fall into that kind of category where the response is like, shall we worry about that if we ever get there? In other words, what I mean by that is, if you're the kind of person who is interested in this stuff, who feels overwhelmed, who feels a lot of responsibilities in life, who
Hmm.
comes to live events such as this one and is interested in the School for Focus and all these things, you're probably not at a very significant risk of
Hmm.
just doing nothing. Your risk is almost certainly the opposite,
Opposite, yeah,
right?
okay.
Your risk is almost certainly that you're trying to do too many things. So, maybe there's somebody out there who would read my book and it would and they would just become totally unproductive. I don't think that's a major risk for most of us on this uh, call. I think so if I can sort of dial down the frenetic nature of things a bit, I don't think I'm at risk of dialing it all the way down. But the other,
Okay.
but the other point that is almost more important, really, in a way to say, is that when I talk about imperfectionism as a way of life,
Hmm.
I'm really not talking about either not really doing very much or doing it all to a terribly low standard. I'm talking precisely instead about beginning to let go of some of those psychological barriers that prevent us from actually doing the things. So I think that if you take these ideas to heart a bit, you find that you spend half an hour writing your novel instead of thinking about how in 6 months' time, when everything's organized, you're going to write the perfect novel. You spend a few minutes posting on social media or phoning a friend or being a
Hmm.
community activist or whatever the thing is that is part of your meaning in life. You actually do it
Yeah.
by internalizing this instead of waiting for the time when it feels perfectly right to do it.
Yeah, there was already a comment from somebody in the chat, but it's in Dutch. En dus wat ik jullie zeker ook zou willen zeggen, als jullie al bepaalde opmerkingen hebben of vragen hebben voor Oliver, zet het al zeker in de chat. Maar ik ga nu even voort met mijn vragen in het Engels. Maar dus rond 7:10 of zo kom ik zeker naar jullie en dan kunnen jullie hem vragen stellen. Um, in your work, Oliver, you also refer to a quote from a tech entrepreneur, Andrew Wilkinson, who once said the following. I will first say it in English and then in Dutch. Most successful people are just an anxiety disorder harnessed for productivity. Ik ga het even zeggen in het Nederlands. De meest succesvolle mensen onder ons zijn wandelende angststoornissen en ze zijn enkel gericht op productiviteit. And I have to say, Oliver, that it really resonated with me because maybe I recognize myself in this image. But first of all, to what extent do you agree with this quote? And I think we can say you are successful yourself. So do you think you also suffer from this disorder?
I do agree with the quote, and I certainly have suffered from that disorder. Maybe I'm in a certain recovery from it now,
Mhm.
but looking back at my earlier adulthood, absolutely, 100%. I What I take this to be referring to is this idea that this kind of person that psychologists call insecure overachievers.
Hmm.
I don't know if you want to translate that or if it's obvious to this very Anglophone audience, but the idea being that a lot of us who are doing, it seems, pretty well in life, or who have achieved a lot of things, or who our friends think of us as very driven and all the rest of it, are very often doing that at least partly for a reason of insecurity, to sort of to try to feel okay uh, about themselves. And I think this way of functioning gives a kind of an anxious quality to everything we do, because it's sort of productivity is never enough to
Hmm.
reach that state of feeling okay. So in a way, what I'm trying to do, I feel, in some of my writing, is to say, is there a way of being ambitious and having big plans and big goals, whether they are in the field of business or, as a sort of social entrepreneur or creativity, whatever it is? Is there a
Hmm.
way of being really ambitious that is different than that, that doesn't come from an anxious place? Can I, the problem I'm trying to solve for myself is, can I have peace of mind and also be ambitious to create lots of things? So that's,
Okay.
yeah.
What really attracts me in your books is, well, the philosophical reflections, because they provide a strong foundation for then what follows. That means like tips and tricks. And I would like you to give like two concrete tips for our listeners. So something that they can start applying just from tomorrow on. So in the first part of the interview, it was rather philosophical, and
Hmm.
now maybe two concrete tips.
Sure, I happily will do. I want to say before I answer that that I I go back and forth about this. I actually think that the most practical things that we can do to make a difference in our lives are in fact the changes in perspective. So even though it feels like you have changes in perspective on one side and tips and tricks on the other, I actually think that changes in perspective are really very, very practical. And one of the things I tried to do in this most recent book was to structure it in a way that would actually make these perspective shifts into a day-to-day reality for the person reading the book. Um, that said, I'm also all the way through the book scattering through these specific ways that you can uh, do things differently. I think what one that seems to resonate with people a lot is just this very, very simple idea of keeping a done list
Mhm.
of either instead of your to-do lists or as well as your to-do lists, having some way of making a record where through the day you add the list of the things that you have um, already done. It's so simple, it seems like it shouldn't have that much of an effect, but people find this to be really sort of powerful way of letting go of that urge to always compare how much you have done to all the things that are still to do, because that second list is an infinite list, right? There's always an infinite amount still to do. So it's a very depressing way to go through the day. Um, uh, I give Elon Musk no credit for this. I reject that absolutely, Stefan. Um, what else? And then I think that another. I mean, some of the ideas in the book are not so much a tip as in carry this out, but it's more just a sort of a thought to keep in the back of your mind while you're moving forward with with something. So one of the ones that I really like towards the end of the book is what I call starting from sanity, and I can go into a
Mhm.
whole description of that, but very, very quickly, all I mean is if there is some way that you want to be in the world, or some things that you want to be doing uh,
Hmm.
in your life, it's uh, the really important thing is to find some tiny, tiny way in which you can bring that into reality right away, today, tomorrow, instead of, as you guessed from what I've said before, instead of making these very big, grand but hypothetical plans for the future. So this is
Mm.
much less about saying, um, in 6 months' time, I'm going to get myself into a position where I can
Hmm.
leave my job and write a novel. I keep using that example, but and much more about saying, like, how can I find 10 minutes to just write, however badly, however distractedly, but in reality today? Because very often those long-term plans, they serve as a way of actually avoiding doing things rather than a way of doing them.
That's a great quote. But you started with the idea that a change in perspective is practical.
Hmm.
You mentioned don't keep like the to-do list, but then the done list, and then starting from sanity. Another tip that I liked in your book, I don't remember whether it was in the first one or the second one, is that at a certain moment you just have to stop working. So when I read this, I started applying it for myself. So I start rather late at half past 9, and then I always stop at half. Normally, I always stop at 5:30. Even so, when you said even if you're eager to keep on going, you
Right.
just should stop. That was
Yeah.
really that was really practical, but it's really a nice idea, and so it really helped me. Um, Here and there in your work, and this is really a question that I have to ask you. So it's a bit tricky, but anyhow, I'm going to ask the question.
No, yeah.
Here and there in your work, you reference religion.
Hmm.
You reference the idea from Protestantism that we
Hmm.
must be productive on earth to earn success or to earn access to paradise.
Hmm.
That is like one idea. Then you also refer to the Jewish tradition of Sabbath, so a
Hmm.
moment that we can stop being productive.
Hmm.
But you also frequently refer to Zen masters. So the
Yep.
question I really, really wanted to ask you is, what is your religion, and are you a Buddhist? That is really the
No,
question
I
that I
mean,
wanted to ask you. Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, it's funny. I keep coming back in my work to these religious themes, both positive and negative, as it were, right? All the major religions uh, have positive and negative influences on us
Hmm.
today. And I think that's really partly just because until a few centuries ago, almost all philosophy and thinking and anything was done inside the container of religion, right? So
Uh,
it's not a big surprise that that this is how what we keep going back to. I come from a sort of strange mixed background,
mm,
Jewish on my
hmm.
father's side. I was raised as a Quaker, um, one of the English non-conformist Christian uh, groups. I have spent plenty of time doing Buddhist meditation retreats and
Uh-huh.
things like that. The honest truth is that I think that my real sort of uh, guiding philosophy is kind of being a reporter.
A report, is that a
It's almost like
religion?
journalism as a spiritual practice, right? It's this idea that I'm not saying I always succeed, but my value that I would aspire to is that I would be very
Hmm.
open to locating helpful wisdom no
Okay.
matter where it was. Um, I will agree that when you do that, or when I have done it, and you try to be very, very open to any tradition, if it has
Mhm.
something useful to contribute, I have found that I keep coming back to Zen. Yes, I mean, and to Taoism also. I think those two Eastern spiritual traditions are very, um, they fit my taste somehow. Um, but there's really, there's an enormous amount of richness in pretty much every
Religion.
religion. And I'm sort of a bit of an old mixture at this point. Yeah.
Okay, but you said journalism is a spiritual, as
Well,
a spiritual practice.
maybe
I like that.
my religion is being a reporter. Maybe I don't know. That sounds a bit ridiculous, but
No, but I think that some people like the idea. Another thing that took my attention is that, well, we are we are told to avoid distractions, and then you emphasize in one of the titles of your latest book on the importance of staying distractible. So you just give like the opposite message. Could you explain that?
yeah. I mean, there are a lot of thoughts here, but I think the basic one is that um, there's nothing wrong with trying to sort of spend a few hours of each day in very, very intense focus if you are able to do that, if you have the freedom in your professional situation. But I don't think that it makes a lot of sense for our goal to be. There's this ideal, isn't there, around at the moment in the world of personal development and elsewhere that the sort of the perfect ideal for us all would be to have total control over our attention, to be in a state of incredibly deep focus all the time. And maybe we can't manage it, but it's still the thing we should be
Hmm.
aspiring to in in theory. And one of the ideas that I'm passing along in that chapter is that this is not the natural state of human attention. I think the natural state of human attention is to sort of gently move between things. For simply for evolutionary reasons, it would be a disaster if you could not have your attention pulled away from
Hmm.
one thing to another, because there are all sorts of reasons why we need to do that when we're maybe
Yeah.
raising children or crossing the road or uh,
Hmm.
whatever. Um, and so that you can sort of set up a very unhelpful internal fight with yourself, really, if you find the very fact of your mind wandering to be
Hmm.
a sign of failure. I think it's more a question of learning to sort of accept some of that, learning, and this is important, I think, not to like the problem with social media, for example, is not that we are distractible. The problem is that once you've been distracted to a social media network, it might be 3 hours before you leave it. So anyway, I think this has a whole bunch of implications, but that was the basic point that you were referring to, I think.
Okay. I would like to remember from what you said, a gentle move between different things, so focus and less focus, focus and mind wandering.
Mhm.
You also talk about the importance of defining a life task. Is that like the same as what we call purpose, the purpose of life, or a calling? And could you also explain to the people listening to us how one might find this life task? Well, we have two questions for you. This life task, is it like finding your calling, and how to define a life task?
Yeah, so I love this notion, which comes really from Carl Jung. Um, I love it really as an alternative to these ideas about purpose or destiny or calling or vocation,
Hmm.
because one of the things that I think he is saying and that I find so useful is that you don't really define it, right? You don't sort of sit in the middle of your existentialist universe and decide what your meaning is going to be. It's more in the spirit of looking at your reality and sort of asking the question, what is life asking of me right
Hmm.
now? And there's a whole story. I won't go into the story, but the whole story from Jung's childhood about uh, when he was first struck by the sense that there was a task ahead of him, something that he had to do. I think it can be very liberating because we can get into all sorts of psychological tangles asking, well, is this life path going to make me happy? Is this what I should be doing to fulfill somebody's expectations? Is this what I should be doing to realize my potential? And you can sort of, at least sometimes, just sweep all that aside and just say, well,
Mm-hmm.
what is reality asking of me here? And it can be very powerful. What Jung says a couple of things about locating your life task. He tends to mean he tends to talk as if we have one life task through our life, but I think this is quite a useful frame to just ask, you know, what is my life task right now? It doesn't necessarily need to be a lifelong thing. And he says, firstly, it's it's not likely to be the easiest option, right? It's likely to be
Mm-hmm.
something that takes some
Effort.
effort. But on the other hand, it's going to be possible, right? It's going to be
Yeah.
something you can do. And I think this is a very useful thought because I think that a lot of the ideas about destiny and calling that we see in popular culture,
Mm-hmm.
they leave people in a terrible situation because they leave often thinking, well, my destiny is to be a Hollywood actor, but I'm stuck here in this tiny town in Europe, or my destiny is to um, raise a family, but I am not able to have children or something like that. And this idea that your destiny could be at odds with your actual
Mm-hmm.
possibilities in life. A life task can't be like that, right? It's
Yeah.
baked into the definition that it is something that you can do
Can do.
next.
Yeah.
And I think that's an incredibly powerful thought.
Yeah. Really nice. There is a clear difference between the title of the English book, so your Meditations for Mortals, and
Yeah,
then the title in Dutch. Dus in het
yeah.
Nederlands is het boek, heeft een heel andere titel gekregen en dat heet
I'm
Vier
just gonna get I'm
Weken.
just gonna pick up the Dutch copy. Hold on
Ah,
one second.
oké, good. Ja, ja, good, good, good. En ook de covers zijn ook helemaal anders. Dus dit is de, voilà, dit is de, oeps, dit is de
I'll wait for
cover
the
van het
focus
Engels.
to
Ja,
the focus.
ja, ja, ja.
There we
Ja,
go.
ja, nu
There we
wel.
go.
Ja, ja, nu wel. Ja, de four weeks reset. And then we have this one, Oliver Burkeman, and then Meditations for Mortals. So the title is different, the cover is different, like the atmosphere is different. Was this your idea, Oliver? The 4 weken reset. It's very practical.
Yeah, no, it wasn't my idea. I'm very happy about it. Um, it was my idea, I suppose, or my agreement to work with Maven Publishing, who I just
Mhm.
have very high estimation of and seem to
Ja.
always do a great job. They have gone very practical. I really like this idea of reset, um, because it has that kind of practical sense, but it's not quite the same thing as a total fresh start, or at least in English. Maybe it is in Dutch. I hope it isn't. But um, it has that sense of, okay, let's get back to first principles here. Let's take a moment. But it isn't you know, change your life in every single way overnight or something, which I think is not that's not something that I'm interested in promoting. It's more a kind of you know, take a deep breath in the midst of all the rest of your busy activities and maybe make a small correction in your course or something like that. So I really like it.
Ja,
But
oké.
it's not for me to say how that comes across to a Dutch speaker, of course.
Ah ja,
Also,
oké.
reset. I mean, that's not a Dutch word, right? That's an English word.
It's an English word, but you have to know that in Belgium we like to use well we use a lot of English words,
Right.
and of course some of the purists among us will not like that. I think Philip Verhagen, for example, he's also a journalist. I think that he prefers Dutch words, but yeah. Anyhow, oh, and
Well, there you go.
yeah, okay, and then there's somebody coming in. That's rather late. Okay, good. Het is nu ongeveer 7:10. Ik had jullie beloofd dat ik 40 minuten lang Oliver de Pier uit zijn neus ging halen. En dat ik nu aan jullie het woord zou geven. En dan hoop ik ook echt dat jullie dat willen doen. Ik heb geen tijd gehad om ondertussen te kijken naar de chat. Dus ik nodig jullie trouwens allemaal uit om toch even te gaan kijken in de chat. Ja, ja. Sounds like Elon Musk. Oké. Oké. Maar dus ik hoop dat jullie vragen willen stellen aan Oliver. En zo, Tini, ben je er nu pas bijgekomen? Ah ja, wacht, hè, ik hoor jou niet.
Oh.
Hoor jij ons? Tini, hoor jij ons? Ja, oké. Er is iemand die zijn video heeft aangezet. Ik zie Kat, ik denk dat dat een ex-collega is van mij, Kathleen van Wolters Kluwer. Ja, wij mogen hier zeker een beetje reclame maken. Kathleen, op dit ogenblik heb jij jouw microfoon afgezet. Zou jij die willen? Voilà, oké.
Ja.
Oliver, you have to know that Kathleen, it's not the first time that she is listening to you. She told me that she already participated in an online interview about your latest book. And so here she is again, and she would like to ask you a question. Kathleen.
Yeah, I actually wrote in the I see it's quite dark, but it doesn't matter.
Yes, yeah.
But
It
I
gives a
wrote
very
in the
mysterious,
chat.
it gives a very mysterious atmosphere. Great, great.
But actually, I wrote in the chat to Isabel that for me, the imperfectionism is actually a decision to put the bar lower so I can actually cross the bar instead of putting it higher and always trying to reach it and actually failing miserably. I had 2 burnouts because I was always putting my bar higher and actually going through this whole process and also going a bit toward Buddhism, meditations, everything makes me realize that it's actually a better decision to put it a bit lower so I can actually cross it and feel accomplished than always trying to reach something that I cannot reach.
It's such a great image, the bar thing, especially since we have this whole cultural ethos of raising the bar, raising the bar, raising the bar. And it also, for me, that way you've expressed it. Oh, hello. It also really points up this fact that, like, nobody is helped by your using standards that you can't, right? I mean, nobody's helped by your never crossing the bar. If you want to talk about if the purpose of your work is to help people, well, they're only helped when you cross the bar. If you're interested in, like, making money by selling things to people, well, you're only going to make the sale if you cross the bar. Whatever your goal is, whether it's selfish or selfless or whatever, yeah, we have to bring things into reality for those things to ever happen. And it's very easy in a way to sort of or find ways to not do that through perfectionistic standards. But I'm just repeating what you said. It's a great way of putting it.
Kathleen, heb je kunnen zeggen wat je wou zeggen?
Yeah, the other thing I can do is go for the fan thing and say, yeah, that I really like his books and I really enjoy reading them. And like I told Isabel, she actually sent us a little message beforehand about the story of how she found your book. And she said
Oliver didn't know that. He didn't know that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But she said it's a 7-minute read. And I told her, like, for me, it always takes longer, but just trying to process what you say. Also, your newsletter, you read it and you're like, okay, really. And certain things you manage to put them in a way that you admire the way you put it in words and realize that's what's been going on in my head. And you managed to put it into words, the feelings that are going on
thank you. That's
in your heads.
I'm glad
and
to
that's
hear
really
that.
nice.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So thank you for mentioning the newsletter. So if you go to Oliver's website, Oliver Burkeman, then you find a link. Well, you can put your email there to get his newsletter. And I also have the impression that when I read it, I have to take my time to read it because it's rather dense. There are always like a lot of messages in the text. And so Oliver, in fact, the text that I sent to the people now here, it's in fact a chapter from my latest book. And so where I explain that I'm going with my son Karel in a difficult time to Portugal, and so where I discover your work, but I also mention other thinkers about positive psychology. And I have to say that I always say to my husband, this chapter is the best chapter I have ever written. And of course that is because I was inspired by you. It is true. Het is het beste dat ik ooit geschreven heb, of waar ik het meest fier op ben. Ondertussen zijn er nog 2 personen, dus dankjewel Kathleen. Ondertussen zijn er nog 2 personen die een hand hebben opgestoken. En de first one was Caroline de Meij. Caroline.
Yeah. Hello, Oliver, hello, Kat, also, because I was triggered by what you said. There is this saying in Belgium that proper preparation prevents poor performance. And I was one of those that was always ticking all the boxes, perfectionist, before I ever would give a presentation or whatever. And then comes a little crack and you are like paralyzed. So what you say today is actually what is great, and it is change of perspective. You don't have to be prepared for everything, but be prepared that there might come a change of perspective that makes you like turning around your presentation, your questioning, your answering. So really thank you very much for change of perspective. Helps a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting aspect of this whole topic, that feelings of when you feel ready to do something, and how it's quite easy to be very almost cruel to yourself trying to get to the state of feeling completely ready to do things. And of course, there's another kind of person who just doesn't care that they don't feel ready to do things. They just do things anyway. And so it's really, we think of those people as being very confident and prepared, but I think they're probably just more at peace with the fact that they feel unready. So yeah, that's definitely a form of perfectionism, isn't it? That kind of attempt to feel like you know that the thing you're about to do is going to go well, but we can never know that because it's in the future. So
Yeah.
yeah.
There's another question from Anke. She raised her hand, and there's also another question from Inge that is in the chat. But first, we listen to Anke.
Yes, Oliver, I was wondering, as the mindset is so important because our mind controls how we feel and what we do, or especially like you spoke today, what we don't do, because we feel too anxious, the bar is too high. But as you also said in the book, 95% of our brain is our subconscious brain, right? So we're not even aware of all those thoughts. So I was wondering, did you just, like me, reprogrammed that brain? Because it's what I did, and I'm still so happy that I put that effort in it. But I was wondering, did you do that as well?
It depends what you mean, I guess. I didn't sort of sit down and decide to reprogram my brain. I think we do that almost without trying when we sort of gradually push ourselves into new ways of being. There's that famous saying about how you don't think your way into new ways of acting, you act your way into new ways of thinking. I hope that translates.
I think both ways can work.
Right. But so I mean,
yeah, but that's a nice way.
Something I found very powerful was the realization that if I tried things a different way, it was going to feel uncomfortable, and that the discomfort was not a problem in itself. And the more that I could do that, the more that seemed to have a very rapid effect in terms of changing my perspective, sort of allow myself to, spend half an hour doing some project, some writing, something that I was very intimidated by, and just sort of accept that it was going to have these uncomfortable, but not actually very painful feelings associated with them. I think that made a big difference. I don't know if that's what you mean by
I know
brain reprogramming, but it feels similar in some way.
Yeah, I think that, like I said, there are two ways. I did also both, but I also really consciously reprogrammed my brain because I was going back to that feeling and really find out where it comes from. And I'm going to a training this next week that's about our brain in the head and also in the stomach and the heart. And that woman told me that the people who have the prior brain in the stomach, like me, they have the most courage to feel the fear and do it anyway. So maybe you're one of them as well. And because it really helped me to understand, like, oh, if you don't have so much courage because you're maybe a more heart person or a head person, then it's more difficult to do and feel the fear anyway, like what you did.
Interesting. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really
What I really liked, so thank you for asking the question, Anke. And then Oliver said, you act your way in new ways of thinking. That's just great. There is another question that comes from Inge. Oliver, it's in the chat, but I'm going to read it out loud. The term curling parenting is getting a lot of attention lately, specifically as a reason why the younger generation seem to be more sensitive to stress and burnout out. Would you agree, or do you have another opinion on that?
I wonder if there's an interesting translation question about the word curling here. I would love another way of saying that might help me understand it even better. Curling parenting is getting a lot of.
Wacht, Inge, wil je anders even het woord nemen? Want ik moet zeggen, ik ken de term niet. Inge, ben je daar nog altijd?
Overprotecting. Okay.
Ah, sorry. Ja,
Yeah,
dankjewel.
Like
Inge.
curling around onto somebody, right? That kind of.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
I really take away all the obstacles to make sure that their children have a happy life. But once they get into the work environment, obviously there are issues and obstacles, and then they struggle. And it's what we see, but I'm not sure if that is the reason, and then how we as an employer should react on that and work with them to learn to overcome those obstacles.
Yeah, that is great. Is that a reference to curling the sport? Is that where
Yes, it is.
Amazing. I love that metaphor. I love
from
it.
a Danish
Making
professor,
everything completely smooth. Love it.
Yes.
That's
Yeah,
brilliant.
it's a Danish professor. I think his name is Hugarden, something like
Right.
that. But yeah,
I
and
think
it's
I think it's just the sport of curling has no visibility in the UK, so
Yeah.
they would use a different word. But yeah, comfort zones. This is an interesting question. I don't know that I have any great insight about the sort of facts of the matter, whether that is what explains certain kinds of psychological struggles that you see now among younger people. I am, Generation X, so on some level I'm part of the generation that's responsible for all that, but through accidents of how things played out in my life, our son is only 8, so I have yet to discover if we are parenting him in a horribly indulgent and controlling way. I think there is that. I'll just speak to what I have found as a parent, I guess, which is that it is really you can believe the importance of not overprotecting your child completely, and actually doing that is a very different challenge, because in each individual moment, the risk of them being exposed to danger or them being exposed to distress seems to be it's something that you don't feel you want to pay that risk in that moment. So you can have a sort of great philosophy of the parent you want to be, but you actually have to takes a sort of constant effort to be that way. I'm not really answering your question, but I do think that any sort of cultural force that seeks to protect us too much from distress or from certain kinds of danger is ultimately going to be counterproductive, because it's kind of baked into the human condition that there is uncertainty and there is and that there is threat and there is danger, and so the sort of destabilizing effect of that when it comes along is all the greater if you've managed to completely avoid it. Never mind parenting, I think in some ways that's kind of the modern condition of living in a developed country with in a stable democratic regimes, at least until recently, and you know, all these kinds of situations where it becomes very, very easy to think that you're almost at the point where you're completely in control of everything, and then it's much, much harder to handle it when shocks come along that remind you that that's not what life is like.
Yeah, uncertainty is baked into our human condition. So thank you, Inge, for this beautiful question. There is another question from Philippe. Should writers strive for uninterrupted focus time to produce their best work, or does embracing interruptions and imperfections of daily life lead just to richer, more authentic writing? Dankjewel, Philippe, voor deze vraag. Ik zou willen antwoorden, maar het is niet mijn interview. Ja, Philippe, you wanted to say something.
To add, in fact, it's a question to hear. How do you perform your own writing? How do you work with focus, or how do you create your books or your texts in terms of focus?
Yeah, it's I mean, I think about this a lot, obviously, and I experiment with all sorts of things, but in the new book I've got this whole chapter on this idea of what I call the 3 to 4 hour rule of creative work, which speaks to this fact that if you look back through history at all sorts of authors and artists and scientists and composers, you find again and again and again that when people have the freedom to do this, and obviously many people have not had this freedom in history, but when you have the freedom to do it, what people find most beneficial is to find 3 or 4 hours in the day of really protected focus, but not more. Like it's not helpful, even if you can, to try to, in my opinion, to try to protect 7 or 8 hours of the day. I think there's a very important balance to be struck between the benefits of being undisturbed and the benefits, as you suggested in the question, you know, of having input from the world and being available to the world and having chance encounters with the world. So yeah, on my good days, I'm not going to claim that I'm perfect at any of this, but my day when it's going well would have maybe a sort of quite disciplined block of time, usually from, you know, after my son is at school until sometime around lunchtime, and it's quite protected, and I have a specific outcome in mind for that time, and I don't make appointments during that time. But then I also don't struggle to do that with the rest of the time. I sort of say, okay, like life is life. It's going to be all over the place. And actually, it's kind of better for me that it is all over the place. So it's the boring answer, a bit of both.
I really like the 3 to 4 hour rule. I have to say that I apply it myself, but for me, 3 to 4 hours is just, it's too much. So for me, it's 2 hours of focus time a day, and then, yeah.
Let me just respond to that and say, I think, you know, recently it's been a bit too much for me, and I've been dialing it down a bit. It kind of doesn't matter, because if you can achieve pretty good consistency, and again, you can be perfectionistic about that too and say it's got to be every single day, and it doesn't have to be every single day. But if you can do even an hour most days for a few weeks, you will astound yourself at what gets done over that time. So yeah, I think it's much more important that there's a spirit of regularity is much more important than either absolute consistency or 3 or 4 hours. And I think I saw the beginning of a response in the chat that I didn't see as well. Like, yeah, if your life doesn't allow for this to be a daily thing, but it should start as a weekly thing, still amazing, you know. So
yeah. What I like in English is that you have the word, Philippe, you have the word in English, daily-ish. Dus zo goed als dagelijks. En dat is eigenlijk ook een element dat vaak terugkomt. Okay, I would like to thank all of you for having been here. It's now 7:30. Ik zag daarnet vanuit mijn linker ooghoek mijn man binnenkomen die voor mij gekookt heeft. Dat is gewoon fantastisch. I would like to remember like 3 things. Well, a lot of things were said, but I would like to remember 3 things that Oliver said. A change in perspective is practical. That's number 1. Number 2, uncertainty is baked into our human condition. And number 3, you act your way in new ways of thinking. Ik heb kippenvel gekregen van alle dingen die Oliver zei. In onze wereld moet altijd alles snel gaan, social media, heel scherpe headlines. En Oliver heeft, ik hoop dat jullie dat gemerkt hebben, als jullie een vraag gesteld hebben, dan heeft u ook altijd nagedacht en wou je echt nadenken over het goede antwoord. So I would like to thank all of you for having been here, and certainly to also Oliver. And so I hope that you all subscribe to Oliver's newsletter, and that you read his books, en dat het er uiteindelijk voor zorgt dat je leven niet zomaar vol zit, maar dat er meer voldoening komt. So Oliver has said so to make sure that our lives are not full, but a bit more fulfilling. And with these words, I would like to end this call. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Salut.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Tada.
Isabel, ik zal ook uw boeken nog lezen, hoor. Niet alleen van Oliver.
Het is niet alleen sproet, maar goed werk en gids. Maar ja, ik ga jullie laten, want mijn man zit op mij te wachten. Bedankt dat jullie er waren. Salut, ciao. Dag.
Hoi, tot ziens.
Dag. Dankjewel dat jullie er waren.